All right, everyone, get ready,
Right.
because today we are going deep, deep into the IMF.
The International Monetary Fund.
That's the one. And, this is a big one. It always seems to be causing a stir. You've sent us a ton of stuff to go through.
A real mix, yeah.
We've got investigative journalism, history books. We've even got the IMF's own publications.
Official stuff, right?
And a few, well, let's just say some less conventional takes on things, too.
That's what I love about these deep dives, We're going to really get into the IMF.
Yeah, from all sides.
Especially what it all means for developing nations.
That's the big question, isn't it? Is it the good guy? Helping out where needed?
Or is there more to the story?
Because they say they're all about global stability
Right, the safety net.
when economies are in trouble.
Yeah.
But then you hear about all these conditions on the loans they give out,
Yeah.
and countries having to make really tough choices that sometimes make things worse.
It's a real dilemma.
To understand all of this, I think we need to go back to the beginning.
Back to the start.
World War II, right? That's when the IMF came about.
That's right, it was born out of the ashes of the war.
When everyone was looking to avoid another economic catastrophe.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
the IMF, it was supposed to be like a global referee.
Making sure no one cheats.
Yeah, and that we don't end up with another Great Depression.
That was the idea.
A lender of last resort.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
Like a global emergency fund, but with some very specific rules.
Oh, yeah, there are always conditions.
And that's where things get controversial, right?
Right.
I mean, we've got these reports from Malawi,
Oh, Malawi, yes.
where the IMF allegedly told them to sell off their emergency grain reserves to pay back a debt
Really?
when the country was on the verge of a famine.
Wow.
It's these types of stories that make people criticize the IMF.
Yeah, and that Malawi case,
Yeah.
if it's true, it really shows what people are worried about.
Especially with these structural adjustment policies.
The SAPs.
So that grain thing in Malawi, that was part of a bigger set of rules from the IMF
Probably.
in exchange for aid, right?
Right.
And those SAPs include all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, things like privatization, cutting back on social programs.
And the IMF says this is all to help stabilize and improve the economy.
That's the theory.
But critics say these SAPs can actually do more harm than good.
It's a delicate balance.
I mean, selling off food when people are already hungry,
Right.
that's a tough situation.
No easy answers there.
And then you have the IMF pushing for things like removing fuel subsidies,
Ah, yes. Fuel subsidies.
especially in places like Nigeria.
Nigeria is an interesting case.
They're a major oil producer,
Africa's largest, in fact.
but they have so many struggles.
Yeah. Poverty, unemployment, infrastructure problems.
It's like a paradox.
Really is.
And the IMF says these fuel subsidies are messing things up.
Distorting the market.
Yeah, and costing the government a lot of money.
Right. Draining their resources.
But on the ground, for everyday Nigerians,
Yeah.
it means they have to pay more for fuel that comes from their own country.
Right. It can feel pretty unfair.
Yeah. It's easy to see how that could lead to unrest.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just economics at play here.
It's about fairness. It's about who controls resources. It's about who benefits.
And that leads us to an even more controversial claim.
Yeah. What's that?
Well, some people say that the IMF is working with AFRICOM,
AFRICOM.
the U.S. Africa Command.
So the IMF is making countries vulnerable economically
And AFRICOM is ready to step in.
to secure the resources.
That's the allegation.
I mean, is that really happening?
It's a serious claim, and we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
But there is some evidence in the sources we've got, right?
There are some things that make you wonder.
Like what specifically? Oh, well, for example, we've got these reports about war games.
War games.
Yeah, run by the U.S. Army War College.
Interesting.
And they were simulating intervening in Nigeria
Oh, wow.
to secure oil fields,
Right.
if things were to get unstable there.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. A little scary, actually.
And these war games, they are just hypothetical.
Right, of course.
But they do show us that the U.S. military is worried about these kinds of resource conflicts in Africa.
Yeah.
And then you've got AFRICOM officials themselves
Right.
talking about how important it is to protect
Protect what?
the free flow of natural resources.
That's a loaded phrase.
It is,
It really makes you wonder if a country like Nigeria,
with all that oil.
yeah, if they're just seen as a pawn in some big game.
It's a valid concern.
And is the IMF involved in all this?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's time to bring in some different perspectives.
Yeah, let's hear from the critics.
The people who see the IMF in a very different light.
Right.
Like, for example, John Perkins.
Oh, John Crockins, yeah?
He was the self-proclaimed economic hitman.
Right. He's got some strong opinions about the IMF.
He says they're used to trap developing nations in debt.
Debt they can never repay.
Exactly, and then force them to open up their markets to Western corporations.
So basically, losing control of their economies.
That's his.
It's definitely a provocative theory.
It fits into that whole neocolonialism idea, right?
Exactly.
That Western powers still control former colonies, but through economics now.
Yeah, not direct rule anymore.
So it's not just about the money, it's about who's really in charge.
Who has the power to make the rules?
Exactly.
Perkins's story may be just one person's experience.
Right.
But it does make you think about these global power dynamics.
Yeah, it does.
Is the IMF really neutral, or is it favoring certain interests?
And it reminds me of what happened in Libya.
After Gaddafi.
Yeah, in 2011.
What about it?
Well, they had that huge sovereign wealth fund, billions of dollars.
Right, I remember.
And after the intervention, it was basically frozen.
Wow.
Controlled by Western powers.
That's pretty unsettling.
It makes you think, could that happen to other countries with lots of resources?
Like Nigeria?
Yeah, like Nigeria.
If they don't play ball.
Exactly.
That's a worrying thought.
So is the IMF ultimately a force for good?
Helping countries?
Or is it doing more harm than good?
Maintaining an unfair system.
Or is it just a pawn in a bigger game?
It's a really complex issue, no easy answers.
That's for sure.
It's clear the IMF has a lot of power,
Yeah.
and that power can be used in different ways.
This is a lot to take in.
It is, but this isn't just about looking at the past.
Right.
It's about finding solutions.
Solutions for a fairer global financial system.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that. What can we do
What can be done to address these concerns?
to make sure the IMF is a force for good?
A force for positive change.
How do we make sure that developing countries aren't being taken advantage of?
That's the key, isn't it?
It really is, isn't it? We've been digging into the IMF.
Yeah.
Its power, its impact, the good, the bad,
Right.
the worries about how it affects developing nations. So what can
Yeah.
we actually do?
To make things better?
Yeah, to make sure the global financial system is fairer, more just,
It's a big question.
it feels overwhelming almost.
Well, I think the first step is
Yeah.
awareness,
Yeah.
right? Understanding the issues.
Yeah. We've definitely done some of that today.
You've learned a lot about the IMF, how it works.
We have.
Now use that knowledge. Talk about it.
With friends, family.
Exactly. The more people understand,
Better.
the more we can hold these institutions accountable.
So it's not enough to just learn about it ourselves.
Right. We have to spread the word.
Get others involved.
Yeah, get people talking, get people thinking.
But just talking doesn't change policies, does it?
No, you're right.
What about action?
Well, awareness is the first step, but action comes next.
So what kind of action?
You have more power than you might think.
Oh.
Remember, the IMF is accountable to its member countries,
Okay.
and you're a citizen of a member country, right?
I am, yeah.
So you have a voice.
What do I do with that voice?
You contact your elected officials.
My representatives?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let them know you care about these issues.
Okay.
Demand transparency from the IMF.
Transparency.
Yeah, about how they work with developing countries.
Okay.
And advocate for reforms.
To give those countries more of a say.
Exactly. Make your voice heard.
So write letters, make calls, all that.
Yeah, exactly.
But what if I want to do more than just talk to politicians?
There's a lot more you can do.
Really?
You can support organizations working on these issues.
Like what kinds of organizations?
Groups that focus on IMF reform, global economic justice, things like that.
Okay, so donating, volunteering.
Exactly. There are campaigns for debt relief for developing countries, too.
Okay, so we can get involved on a personal level, a political level.
Right. There's a lot individuals can do.
It's just sometimes it feels like one person can't really make a difference.
Well, that's where collective action comes in.
Right.
You're not alone in this. There are people all over the world.
Fighting for the same thing.
Yeah, working for a fairer global financial system.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it.
It is.
We started by looking at the IMF, this big, powerful institution.
Right.
And now we're talking about individual people.
And the power of collective action.
Working together to change things.
Exactly. And that's the important thing to remember.
What's that?
The IMF, yeah, it's powerful, but it's still a reflection of us.
Of us.
Of the choices we make, the things we support, our values.
We have the power to change it.
That's right. We can demand that it works for everyone.
Not just a few.
Exactly. A fairer world for all.
Well, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
The IMF, how it works, the good and the bad.
The criticisms.
Yeah, the calls for reform, the impact on developing nations,
We even talked about some alternatives.
different ways of doing things.
It's been a long journey.
It has. I've learned a lot.
I hope you have too.
And I hope it's made you want to learn more.
Yeah, to keep digging, to stay involved.
Because we can make a difference.
We can. Our voices matter.
To keep asking questions, keep learning.
Keep pushing for a better world.
The power to shape the future is in your hands.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the IMF.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.